I shared my bed with a homeless man, then he gave me a number and said, "Time for revenge." I stared at Rick's sleeping form. His face looked peaceful, almost innocent. But now I noticed things I'd missed, the way his fingers weren't stained or calloused like someone who'd lived rough for years. The fact that his teeth, though yellowed, were straight and well-maintained. Was this a threat? A warning? Had I let a dangerous man into my home? Have you ever felt compelled to help a stranger, even when everyone told you not to? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The homeless man I let sleep on my couch left me a cryptic note that would expose $1 million conspiracy. 4 words scrawled beneath a string of numbers, time for revenge. I thought I was helping a drifter. I had no idea I was harboring a man who'd been legally erased from existence. Have you ever made a split-second decision that changed everything? Have you ever felt compelled to help a stranger, even when everyone told you not to? That night in Toledo, my compassion nearly got me killed, or so I thought. What would you do if you discovered the person you saved was planning something that could destroy lives? If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to reclaim what was stolen from them, this story will shake you to your core. Follow along as we uncover a mystery that's been buried for decades. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain hammered my roof like bullets that October night in Toledo. I was curled up with my coffee, watching old movies, when I heard the knock. Soft at first, then desperate. Through the peephole, I saw him, soaked to the bone, gray hair plastered to his skull, eyes that held too much pain for one lifetime. "Please," he said when I cracked the door. "Just for tonight. I won't cause trouble." Something in his voice made me step aside. "Rick," he called himself. Just Rick. He moved like a gentleman despite the torn coat and muddy boots. When I handed him a towel, his thank you came with proper grammar, not the slurred words I expected. "You're not like the others," I said, watching him dry his hands with careful precision. He looked up with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Neither are you. Most people would have called the police." I heated up leftover soup, gave him clean clothes that belonged to my ex. Rick ate slowly, savoring each spoonful like it was his last meal. We talked about nothing important, the weather, the city, how cold October nights could bite through your bones. "I appreciate this more than you know," he said before settling on my couch. His voice carried an education that didn't match his appearance. "Tomorrow, I'll be gone. Promise." I went to bed feeling good about helping someone. That warm feeling lasted exactly 7 hours. When I woke at dawn, Rick was still sleeping peacefully. But on my nightstand sat a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. My hands shook as I opened it. A long string of numbers filled the top: 1998, KY, 47821D, 2001, TN, 55932B, 2003, OH, 21104C. Below them, in neat handwriting that looked nothing like a homeless man's scrawl, were 4 words that stopped my heart: time for revenge. I stared at Rick's sleeping form. His face looked peaceful, almost innocent. But now I noticed things I'd missed, the way his fingers weren't stained or calloused like someone who'd lived rough for years. The fact that his teeth, though yellowed, were straight and well-maintained. Was this a threat? A warning? Had I let a dangerous man into my home? I clutched the note, my pulse racing. The numbers meant nothing to me, but those 4 words felt like a promise of violence. Was this my thank you for showing kindness? A death threat left by my bedside? But when I looked at Rick again, something didn't fit. He seemed more at peace than anyone I'd seen in years. Would you confront a stranger about a threatening note, or call the police? Tell me in the comments what you would do. I stood there for 10 minutes, note trembling in my hand, watching Rick sleep. The morning light streaming through my windows made everything feel different, less dramatic, more confusing. His face looked tired but kind, not like someone plotting violence. Part of me wanted to call 911. The smart part. The part that remembered every crime show warning about trusting strangers. But another part, the part that had opened my door last night, whispered that something else was happening here. The numbers bothered me more than the words. They looked official, like case numbers or file references. Too organized for a simple threat. Rick stirred, and I quickly shoved the note into my pocket. His eyes opened slowly, and when he saw me standing there, he didn't look surprised or guilty. He looked relieved. "Morning," he said, sitting up and folding the blanket I'd given him with military precision. "I should get going. Don't want to overstay my welcome." "Rick." My voice cracked slightly. "Did you leave something for me last night?" He paused in his folding, hands going still. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then his shoulders relaxed, like he'd been carrying a weight for years and finally found somewhere to set it down. "You read it." Not a question. A statement of fact. I pulled the note from my pocket, holding it between us like evidence. "What is this?" Rick stood up, and I noticed for the first time how he carried himself, straight-backed, confident. Not like someone who'd been broken by the streets. "It's the beginning of something I should have started 20 years ago." He moved to my window, looking out at the neighborhood like he was seeing it for the first time. "Those numbers? They're court case references, bank file numbers, deed registration codes. I don't understand." He turned back to me, and his eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there the night before. "I used to own land in Kentucky. Good land. Land that's worth millions now because of what they found underneath it." The way he said "used to" made my stomach clench. "What happened to it?" "They stole it. Legally. With papers and signatures and official stamps. Made it look like I sold it willingly." His voice stayed calm, but I could see his hands clenching. "Took everything I had and left me with nothing but the clothes on my back." I stared at him, trying to process this. That's not possible. You can't just steal someone's land." Rick's laugh had no humor in it. "You can when you know the right people. When you have lawyers who can forge signatures and judges who don't ask questions. When the man you're stealing from is just a simple country boy who trusts the system." The note felt heavier in my hand. "So what's this about revenge?" When Rick looked at me then, his eyes held something I hadn't seen before, not anger, but determination. Cold, patient determination. I've been carrying those numbers for 20 years. Memorized every case file, every document, every piece of evidence. I've been waiting for the right moment, the right person to help me. And you think that's me? You let a stranger into your home during a storm. You fed me, gave me shelter, treated me like a human being." He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of soap from his morning wash. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character." My heart was beating faster, but not from fear anymore. From something else entirely, excitement, maybe. Or the thrill of standing at the edge of something huge and unknown. "What kind of help are you talking about?" Rick reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn manila envelope, thick with papers. The kind that could get us both in serious trouble. The kind that could also make sure justice finally gets served. "Have you ever discovered someone wasn't who they seemed? Share your story in the comments below." My kitchen felt different with Rick sitting at my table, that envelope spread between us like a bridge to another world. The morning coffee I'd poured grew cold as he pulled out document after document, each one looking more official and more terrifying than the last. "This is my original deed," Rick said, sliding a yellowed paper toward me. "Signed by my father in 1995, passed to me when he died 2 years later." I studied the document. The signature looked bold and confident, nothing like the shaky handwriting of someone being forced to sign. "It looks legitimate." "It is legitimate. This next one, though." He placed another deed beside the first. Same property, same legal description, but dated 2001. The signature looked similar but somehow wrong, too perfect, like someone had practiced copying it. "That's not your signature." "No, it's not. But according to the state of Kentucky, I signed my land over to Appalachian Holdings LLC for $60,000. Rick's jaw tightened. Want to know what that land is worth today? I was afraid to ask. $12 million. Oil company came through in 2005, found one of the richest deposits in eastern Kentucky. Royalties have been flowing ever since. The number hit me like a physical blow. 12 million? Every year. Rick pulled out bank statements, royalty checks made out to companies I'd never heard of. For the past 18 years, they've been collecting what should have been mine. I stared at the papers, trying to wrap my mind around the scale of theft he was describing. How is this possible? Don't you have lawyers? Couldn't you fight this? Rick's expression darkened. I tried. Spent every penny I had on legal fees. But funny thing about fighting rich people, they have better lawyers, and they know judges who don't like asking uncomfortable questions. He pulled out a newspaper clipping from 2002. The headline read, "Local man's claims dismissed as frivolous." The photo showed a younger Rick, clean-shaven and desperate-looking, standing outside a courthouse. They painted me as unstable. A troublemaker. Said I was harassing good businessmen with wild conspiracy theories. Rick's voice stayed level, but I could feel the pain underneath. After a while, people stopped listening. Hell, I almost started believing them myself. What changed? Time. And the fact that they got sloppy. He spread out more papers, court filings, notary records, bank transfers. I've spent 20 years collecting every document, every record, every piece of evidence. And you know what I found? The intensity in his eyes made my pulse quicken. What? They didn't just steal from me. This same pattern, same signatures, same fake companies, they've done this to dozens of families across 3 states. Poor folks, mostly. People who wouldn't be missed, who didn't have the resources to fight back. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. How many? At least 40 families that I can prove. Probably twice that many. Rick leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, stolen through forged documents and bought judges. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Rick, if what you're saying is true, it's bigger than you think. The company that bought my land? It's owned by a shell corporation in Delaware. That shell company is owned by another shell in Nevada. And that one traces back to a law firm in Nashville with connections to 3 sitting congressmen. I pushed back from the table, overwhelmed. This is insane. Insane, but true. And provable. Rick's hand moved to cover mine, and I felt the calluses that hadn't been visible in the dark. But I can't do it alone. I need someone they haven't bought, someone they don't know about. The warmth of his touch sent an unexpected shiver through me. What are you asking? Help me get these documents to the right people. Help me tell this story to someone who'll listen. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, and I noticed how strong his hands were despite his age. Help me get justice for everyone they've hurt. I looked down at our joined hands, then back at his face. There was something magnetic about his certainty, his quiet strength. This wasn't the broken homeless man from last night. This was someone who'd been forged by injustice into something harder and more determined. And if we do this? What happens to the people who stole from you? Rick's smile was sharp as a blade. They learn that some debts take 20 years to collect, but they always come due eventually. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't entirely from fear. If someone showed you proof of a conspiracy, would you help them expose it, even knowing the danger? Comment your thoughts below. Rick cleared my kitchen table and spread the documents like pieces of a puzzle. Under the morning light, the scope of what he was showing me became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about stolen land, this was about a system designed to prey on people who couldn't fight back. Look at the signatures, Rick said, pointing to 3 different deeds. Same handwriting, same pressure, same mistakes. But supposedly signed by 3 different people across 5 years. I leaned closer, studying the documents. He was right, the signatures were too similar, too perfect. Like someone had traced them. Who did the notarizing? That's the beautiful part. Rick pulled out a stack of notary certificates. Same notary on 43 different documents, spanning 8 years. Only problem is, she died in 1999. The coffee in my stomach turned cold. They used a dead woman's notary seal? For years. And nobody bothered to check because these were just poor folks from the mountains, selling land cheap. Who's gonna question that? Rick's finger traced across bank routing numbers. The money trail is even better. He showed me deposit slips, wire transfer records, checks made out to companies that existed only on paper. Appalachian Holdings LLC was dissolved in 2003, but somehow kept receiving royalty payments until 2018. The money went to a bank account controlled by Nashville law firm Morrison, Burke and Associates. That name sent a chill through me. Morrison? Like Senator Morrison? His brother. Thomas Morrison runs the law firm that's been washing this money for 2 decades. Rick pulled out a photograph, expensive suits, handshakes, political fundraiser backdrop. They didn't just steal land. They built a political machine on stolen money. I stared at the photo, recognizing faces from news coverage, campaign ads. These weren't shadowy criminals, these were respected businessmen and politicians. This goes all the way to Washington. Oil money has a way of traveling upward. Rick's hand found mine again as he leaned closer to point out details. The contact sent electricity through me that had nothing to do with fear. But here's what they didn't count on: someone keeping records. The warmth of his breath on my neck made it hard to concentrate on the documents. What kind of records? Every phone call, every meeting, every payoff. He pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with dates, times, names. I've been tracking their operation for 20 years. Every bribe, every forged document, every family they destroyed. I turned a page and found photographs, parking lot meetings, envelopes changing hands, faces I recognized from local TV news. You've been following them? Following, photographing, recording. Rick's voice dropped lower, more intimate. Did you know Tennessee is a one-party consent state for audio recording? My pulse quickened. You have them on tape. Hours of it. Confessions, plans, discussions of which judges they own. His finger traced down a list of names that made my blood run cold. The problem is, half the people who could prosecute this case are on their payroll. The magnitude of it hit me like a wave. So how do we expose something this big? Rick's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my breath catch, not just determination, but desire. We go around them. Federal investigators, national media, people they can't buy or intimidate. That sounds dangerous. It is. His hand tightened on mine. They've killed to protect this secret before. The last person who tried to expose them ended up in the Ohio River. Fear shot through me, but so did something else, a thrill at being this close to something so dangerous, so important. And being this close to Rick, whose quiet intensity was becoming more attractive by the minute. Why me? I whispered. Why trust me with this? Rick's free hand came up to brush a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle but electric. Because you opened your door to a stranger in a storm. Because you're not afraid to do the right thing, even when it's risky. The kitchen felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. And what if I say yes? Then we make them pay for every family they've destroyed, every life they've ruined. His thumb traced along my jawline. But once we start this, there's no going back. I looked down at the evidence spread across my table, proof of decades of theft, corruption, murder. Then I looked back at Rick's face, seeing not just the homeless man from last night, but someone who'd been tempered by injustice into something formidable and undeniably magnetic. What's our first move? Rick's smile was sharp and satisfied. We pay a visit to the courthouse. Time to see how deep the corruption goes in our own backyard. As he began gathering the documents, his hand brushed mine again. The contact sent heat racing through me, and I realized I wasn't just agreeing to help expose a conspiracy. I was falling for the man who'd spent 20 years planning the perfect revenge. Would you go undercover to expose corruption, even if it meant lying about who you are? Share your thoughts on justice and risk in the comments. The Lucas County Courthouse felt different when you walked in carrying evidence of a conspiracy. Every security camera seemed to track our movement, every clerk's glance felt suspicious. Rick had coached me on the drive over. Act natural, ask for public records, don't mention the bigger picture. We need property transfer records for Pike County, Kentucky, 1998 to 2005, I told the records clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and coffee-stained fingers. She barely looked up from her computer. That'll be $40 for copies, plus processing time. How long for processing? 3 to 5 business days for out-of-state requests. Rick stepped closer to the counter, his presence somehow commanding attention without saying a word. Ma'am, we're doing genealogy research. My grandmother's family owned land down there, and we're trying to piece together the family history. The lie came so smoothly I almost believed it myself. The clerk's expression softened. Everyone had family stories about lost land and forgotten heritage. Well, if it's genealogy. She glanced around, then leaned closer. I might be able to pull those files today if you don't mind waiting. 20 minutes later, we sat in the courthouse parking lot with a stack of documents that made my hands shake. Pike County property records showed the same pattern Rick had described, legitimate sales followed by suspicious transfers, all involving the same shell companies. Look at this, I said, pointing to a deed transfer dated March 15, 2001. The Johnson family sold their farm to Appalachian Holdings. 3 days later, Appalachian sold it to Mountain Vista Energy for 10 times the price. Rick's jaw tightened as he studied the papers. Mountain Vista. That's one of the companies paying royalties to Morrison's law firm. How many families got cheated like this? In this batch alone? 7. Rick flipped through pages, his finger tracing the devastating pattern. The Johnsons, the Crawfords, the Hatfields, good people who trusted the wrong lawyers. A black sedan pulled into the parking space across from us, and Rick's whole body went rigid. We need to go. Now. What's wrong? That car's been following us since we left your house. Rick started my engine, his hand steady despite the tension in his voice. Don't look back. Just act normal. My heart hammered as we pulled out of the parking lot. In the side mirror, I watched the sedan follow at a distance. How long have they been watching you? Years. But they usually keep their distance. Rick turned onto a side street, taking an indirect route back to my neighborhood. Having you with me must have spooked them. The idea that I was now a target sent fear and excitement racing through me in equal measure. What do they think we'll do with this information? Exactly what we're planning to do. Rick's hand found mine on the gear shift, his touch both comforting and electrifying. Take it to someone who can't be bought. We drove in silence for several blocks, the weight of being hunted adding intensity to every glance between us. When Rick's thumb brushed across my knuckles, I felt heat spread up my arm despite the danger. There's something else, Rick said as we pulled into my driveway. The records we just picked up. They're going to know we requested them. The clerk will have to log our visit. So now they know we're not just talking about my case anymore. We're looking at the whole operation. Rick turned to face me, his blue eyes intense in the afternoon light. They'll try to scare us off first. Then, if that doesn't work. He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what happened to people who threatened their empire. Inside my house, Rick spread the new documents alongside his original evidence. The scope of the theft was staggering, dozens of families across 3 states, all following the same pattern of legal manipulation. We can't stay here tonight, Rick said, organizing papers into neat stacks. If they're willing to follow us in broad daylight, they'll escalate after dark. Where can we go? I know a place. Motel outside the city, owner doesn't ask questions. Rick's hands worked quickly, securing documents in waterproof folders. We'll need to move fast and travel light. As I packed a bag with shaking hands, the reality of what we'd started hit me. 24 hours ago, I was a woman living a quiet life in Toledo. Now I was running from people who killed to protect their secrets. But when I looked at Rick, methodically preparing for whatever came next, I felt something stronger than fear. This man had spent 20 years planning for justice, and somehow I'd become part of that plan. Ready? Rick asked, shouldering his worn duffel bag. I grabbed my overnight case and the folder of evidence we'd copied. Ready. As we headed for the door, Rick caught my arm gently. Once we leave here, there's no going back to your old life. Are you sure about this? Looking into his eyes, I saw not just determination but something deeper, a man who'd been alone in his fight for 2 decades, finally finding someone willing to stand with him. The attraction I felt wasn't just physical, it was the pull of shared purpose, of being needed by someone extraordinary. I'm sure. We left through the back door, moving quickly to my car. As Rick drove us toward the highway, I watched my house disappear in the mirror. Whatever happened next, I was committed to seeing this through. The black sedan was nowhere to be seen, but somehow that felt more ominous than being followed. When institutions refuse to help, do you give up or fight harder? Tell me what you would do in the comments. The Sleepy Inn Motel lived up to its name, a place where weary truckers and people running from problems could disappear for a night. Rick paid cash for adjoining rooms, but as we sat on the bed in room 12, sharing takeout Chinese food and planning our next move, the walls between us felt unnecessary. Tomorrow we drive to Nashville, Rick said, spreading documents across the faded bedspread. I've got contact information for a federal investigator who specializes in public corruption cases. You think she'll believe us? Agent Sarah Chen built her career on cases like this. Political corruption, money laundering, organized theft. Rick's finger traced across a business card worn soft from years in his wallet. She's also the only Fed I know who can't be bought. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw. Somewhere between the courthouse and this dingy motel room, the homeless man had completely disappeared, replaced by someone compelling and undeniably attractive. Rick, can I ask you something? Anything. Before all this happened, before they stole your land, what were you like? I set down my chopsticks, suddenly needing to know the man beneath the mission. Rick was quiet for a long moment, staring at papers that represented 20 years of pain. I was simpler. Trusting. I believed people were basically good, that the system worked if you followed the rules. Do you miss that version of yourself? Sometimes. His eyes met mine, and I saw vulnerability there that made my chest tight. But that man couldn't have survived what they put me through. He definitely couldn't have put together a case that'll bring down their entire operation. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. Without thinking, I reached out and covered his hand with mine. I'm sorry they took that from you. Are you? Rick turned his palm up, capturing my fingers. Because if I was still that trusting country boy, I never would have ended up on your doorstep in the storm. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm. Maybe things happen for a reason. Maybe they do. Rick's thumb brushed across my knuckles, the same gesture that had affected me in my kitchen, but now charged with new meaning. You know what scares me most about tomorrow? What? That once we turn over this evidence, once the investigation starts, they won't need me anymore. I'll just be another witness, another victim telling his story to people in suits. I understood what he wasn't saying, that this mission had given his life purpose, direction, meaning. Without it, who was he? And you'll be free to go back to your real life, Rick continued, his voice dropping lower. Back to Toledo, back to your routine. This will all just be a crazy story you tell at parties. Is that what you think I want? Rick's grip on my hand tightened. I think you're an extraordinary woman who got caught up in an extraordinary situation. I think when this is over, you'll realize you don't belong in my world. The hurt in his voice made my heart ache. Here was a man who'd been betrayed so thoroughly he couldn't believe anyone would choose to stay with him. Rick. I shifted closer on the bed, close enough to smell his soap, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Do you know what I realized today? What? For the first time in years, I feel alive. Really, truly alive. My free hand came up to touch his cheek, feeling the rough stubble, the heat of his skin. Not because of the danger or the conspiracy, but because of you. His eyes searched my face like he was trying to memorize every detail. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. I leaned closer, until our faces were inches apart. I'm saying that 24 hours ago, I was sleepwalking through life. And now I'm wide awake. This is crazy, Rick whispered, but he didn't pull away. Yes, it is. I closed the last inch between us, pressing my lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid to want this too much. But then Rick's arms came around me, pulling me closer, and 20 years of loneliness and determination poured into that connection. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. I'd been alone so long, Rick murmured against my forehead. I forgot what it felt like to have someone on my side. You're not alone anymore. I kissed him again, deeper this time, tasting coffee and determination and something that might have been hope. Rick's hands tangled in my hair, and I felt the careful control he'd maintained for 2 decades starting to crack. This wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. 2 people who'd been drifting through life suddenly finding anchor in each other. If we do this, Rick said, his voice rough with want, there's no pretending tomorrow that it didn't happen. Good, I whispered back. I'm tired of pretending. As Rick's lips found mine again, hungrier this time, I realized I wasn't just falling for a man, I was falling for a cause, a purpose, a chance to be part of something bigger than myself. The evidence scattered across the bed crinkled beneath us as we forgot about conspiracies and corruption and focused on the heat building between our bodies. Tomorrow we would face federal agents and dangerous enemies. Tonight, we had each other. Have you ever found yourself attracted to someone fighting for justice? Share your thoughts on love born from shared purpose in the comments. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Rick and I had spent the night alternating between passionate kisses and strategic planning, our bodies pressed together as we studied maps and phone numbers and evidence that could topple a political empire. Agent Chen agreed to meet us at noon, Rick said, hanging up the motel phone. Neutral location, a diner called Murphy's on the outskirts of Nashville. I was getting dressed, hyper-aware of Rick watching me from the bed where we'd shared confessions and caresses until dawn. Think she'll take us seriously? She'll take the evidence seriously. Whether she takes us seriously depends on how well we present our case. Rick stood and moved behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders. We need to play this as a couple doing research. Genealogy hunters who stumbled onto something bigger. The warmth of his touch made it hard to concentrate on strategy. How much do we tell her? Everything. But carefully. Rick's fingers traced along my neck, sending shivers down my spine. Chen's good at her job, but she's also cautious. She won't move on this unless she's convinced it's airtight. The drive to Nashville gave us time to rehearse our story and steal glances at each other like teenagers with a secret. Every time Rick's hand found mine on the gear shift, I felt that same electric connection that had kept us up most of the night. Murphy's diner looked like 1,000 other truck stops, neon signs, vinyl booths, coffee that could wake the dead. Agent Chen was already there when we arrived, a small Asian woman in a conservative blue suit, sitting in a corner booth with clear sight lines to all exits. Mr. Rick, I assume? She stood to shake hands, her grip firm and professional. Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. This is my friend, Rick said, introducing me with the cover story we'd agreed on. She's been helping with the genealogy research. Chen's sharp eyes missed nothing as we slid into the booth across from her. On the phone, you mentioned discovering irregularities in property transfers. What kind of irregularities? Rick opened the folder we prepared, sliding documents across the table with practiced precision. Forged signatures, falsified notary stamps, shell companies designed to hide money flows. Chen studied the papers, her expression growing more serious with each page. This is Pike County, Kentucky? Pike County, Martin County, parts of West Virginia and eastern Tennessee. Rick's voice stayed level, professional. We've identified at least 40 families affected by the same pattern of fraudulent transfers. And you discovered this how? I felt Rick's hand find mine under the table, drawing strength from the contact. My great-grandfather owned land that was supposedly sold in 2001. But when I started researching the sale, nothing added up. Chen looked up from the documents, her dark eyes penetrating. Mr. Rick, what's your real name? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Rick and I had discussed this moment, but facing it still made my pulse race. Richard James Hendricks, Rick said quietly. The land we're talking about? It was mine. Chen leaned back in the booth, reassessing everything. You're not genealogy researchers. No, ma'am. We're the victims. For 10 minutes, Rick laid out his story while Chen took notes and asked sharp questions. She didn't interrupt, didn't show skepticism, just absorbed information like a computer processing data. The Morrison law firm, she said finally. You have documented connections between them and these shell companies? Bank records, wire transfers, correspondence. Rick slid another folder across the table. 20 years worth of evidence. Chen flipped through pages of financial records, her expression unreadable. Mr. Hendricks, do you understand what you're alleging? This isn't just fraud, this is a RICO case involving elected officials. I understand perfectly. Rick's voice hardened. They stole everything I had and destroyed my life. Then they did it to dozens of other families. I've spent 20 years documenting their crimes. And why come forward now? Rick's hand squeezed mine under the table. Because I finally found someone who believed me. Chen's gaze shifted between us, taking in the obvious connection. Are you too? We're partners, I said, meaning it in every sense of the word. In this investigation and in life. Chen nodded slowly. That complicates things. If this goes to trial, your relationship will be scrutinized. Defense attorneys will claim bias, emotional involvement affecting judgment. Let them, Rick said firmly. The documents speak for themselves. Chen closed the folders and looked at us both seriously. I'm going to be honest with you. What you've shown me is compelling, but it's also dangerous. If even half of this is true, you're talking about taking down people with serious political connections. Are you saying you won't investigate? My voice came out sharper than intended. I'm saying I need to verify this independently before I can move forward. And I'm saying you two need to be very, very careful. Chen stood, gathering her copy of the documents. These people have killed to protect secrets smaller than this. As she walked away, Rick and I sat in the diner booth, hands still clasped under the table. The next phase of our mission had begun, but so had the real danger. No going back now, Rick said softly. I brought his hand to my lips, kissing his knuckles. No going back. Would you risk everything to expose corruption that reaches the highest levels of power? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. 3 days after our meeting with Agent Chen, Rick's phone rang at 6 a.m. I was making coffee in the kitchenette of our new motel room when I heard his sharp intake of breath. When? Rick's voice was tight. How many agents? I understand. We'll be there. What's wrong? I asked as he hung up. Chen moved fast. FBI raided Morrison's law firm yesterday morning. Seized computers, files, bank records. Rick's eyes were bright with something between triumph and fear. Thomas Morrison wants to meet. The coffee maker gurgled in the sudden silence. Meet? As in face-to-face? Today. Noon. His office in Nashville. Rick showed me the text message that had just arrived on his phone. Says he wants to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. My stomach dropped. It's a trap. Maybe. Or maybe he's scared enough to try buying us off. Rick pulled me close, his arms wrapping around my waist. Either way, we're going. Rick, no. These people killed the last person who threatened them. And they'll kill us eventually whether we hide or not. Rick's hands cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. The only way we survive this is by finishing it. Getting everything out in the open where they can't touch us. 2 hours later, we stood outside Morrison, Burke and Associates, a gleaming glass tower that screamed money and power. Rick wore his only good suit, and I dressed like someone's wealthy wife, the kind of woman who might invest in shady land deals. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt like ascending to judgment. Rick's hand was warm and steady in mine, but I could feel the tension in his body. Thomas Morrison's office was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Nashville, mahogany furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, walls lined with photos of Morrison shaking hands with senators and governors. Morrison himself was smaller than I'd expected, a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and cold gray eyes. He stood behind his massive desk like a king holding court. Mr. Hendricks. Morrison's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. After all these years, we finally meet properly. Mr. Morrison. Rick's voice held no warmth. You wanted to talk. Please, sit. Morrison gestured to leather chairs positioned deliberately lower than his desk. And introduce your lovely companion. I felt Morrison's gaze crawling over me like something slimy. I'm helping Rick with his research. Research. Yes. Morrison opened a file folder. 20 years of very thorough research, from what I understand. Quite impressive, really. Rick leaned forward slightly. Cut the crap, Morrison. What do you want? Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Direct. I like that. What I want, Mr. Hendricks, is to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The FBI seems to think my firm engaged in some sort of conspiracy regarding land acquisitions in eastern Kentucky. Morrison's tone suggested this was amusing rather than serious. Obviously, that's ridiculous. Rick's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. However, Morrison continued, I understand how someone might misinterpret legitimate business transactions, especially someone who felt displaced by economic development. The condescension in his voice made my hands clench into fists. So here's what I'm prepared to offer. Morrison slid a check across the desk. $2 million. A clean slate. You withdraw your allegations, and everyone moves on with their lives. I stared at the check, my mind reeling. $2 million. More money than most people saw in a lifetime. Rick didn't even look at it. Not interested. Morrison's smile flickered. Mr. Hendricks, I don't think you understand the generosity of this offer. I understand perfectly. Rick stood slowly, his presence suddenly commanding the room. You're offering me hush money for land that's generated $12 million in royalties alone. The land was legally acquired. With forged signatures and a dead woman's notary seal. Rick's voice cut through Morrison's protest like a blade. I have recordings of your people discussing which judges you own, which officials you've bought. Morrison's composure cracked slightly. You're making very serious accusations without proof. Agent Chen has all the proof she needs. Rick moved closer to the desk, and I saw Morrison's hand shift toward his desk drawer. Every forged document, every illegal transfer, every bribed official. Mr. Hendricks, Morrison said slowly, I think you're forgetting something important. What's that? Morrison's smile returned, but now it looked predatory. You don't legally exist anymore. According to state records, Richard Hendricks died homeless in Cincinnati 3 years ago. A John Doe found in an alley, no next of kin. The words hit like a physical blow. Rick went completely still. So you see, Morrison continued, even if you had legitimate claims, which you don't, you're not legally entitled to make them. Dead men don't own property. I watched Rick's hands slowly curl into fists. 20 years of planning, and they'd found a way to erase him completely. But then Rick smiled, and the expression was sharp enough to cut glass. "You're right, Mr. Morrison. Richard Hendricks is legally dead." Rick pulled out his phone, pressing a button. "But Agent Chen's been listening to every word of this conversation." Morrison's face went white as Rick held up the phone, showing an active call to Chen's direct number. "Including your admission that you know about the forged signatures and bribed officials," Rick continued. "And your offer to pay me hush money for crimes you claim didn't happen." Morrison's hand dove into his desk drawer, but Rick was faster, grabbing my wrist and pulling me toward the door. "This isn't over," Morrison shouted as we reached the elevator. "Yes, it is," Rick called back as the doors closed. In the elevator, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the lobby button. "Rick, did Chen really hear all that?" Rick showed me his phone screen. "Call disconnected 5 minutes ago." "You bluffed?" Rick's grin was fierce and triumphant. Sometimes the best weapon against powerful people is making them think they're not as powerful as they believed. When facing corrupt power, do you confront it directly or find clever ways around it? Share your strategy in the comments. We made it exactly 6 blocks from Morrison's office before the first black SUV appeared in my rearview mirror. Rick noticed it at the same time I did. "Don't panic," he said calmly, but I felt his body tense beside me. "Take the next right." I turned onto a side street, watching the SUV follow at a distance. "How many are there?" Rick checked the mirrors. 2 vehicles that I can see. Could be more. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think straight. "What do we do?" "Drive to the police station. Stay on busy streets. Act normal." Rick's hand found mine on the steering wheel, his touch steadying me even as adrenaline flooded my system. "They won't try anything in public." But as we approached downtown Nashville, the SUVs closed in. One pulled alongside us at a red light, windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. The other positioned itself directly behind us. "They're boxing us in," I whispered. Rick squeezed my hand. "When this light turns green, floor it. Head for the interstate." The light changed, and I pressed the accelerator to the floor. My car wasn't built for high-speed chases, but fear gave it wings. We shot through the intersection, weaving between slower traffic while the SUVs struggled to keep up. "There." Rick pointed to an on-ramp ahead. I-40 East. We merged into highway traffic, but the SUVs were still behind us, moving with professional precision. These weren't street thugs, these were people with training. "Rick, I'm scared." "I know, baby." The endearment slipped out naturally, and despite our situation, it warmed me. "But we're going to be okay. I've been preparing for this day for 20 years. We drove in tense silence for an hour, the SUVs maintaining their distance but never disappearing. Finally, Rick directed me to an exit near the Tennessee-Kentucky border. "There's a safe house about 10 miles from here," he explained. "Off the grid, cash rental, no paper trail." The safe house turned out to be a rundown cabin in the woods, the kind of place where people went to disappear. Rick paid the owner, a grizzled man who asked no questions, and we carried our few possessions inside. The cabin was basic but clean, with thick walls and windows that offered clear views of all approaches. Rick immediately began securing the perimeter while I tried to process what had just happened. "Morrison's people?" I asked as Rick checked door locks and window latches. "Probably. Or federal marshals, depending on how fast Chen moved on that recording." Rick pulled curtains closed, transforming the cabin into a fortress. "Either way, we're safe here tonight." Safe was relative. We were fugitives now, whether from Morrison's hired men or federal agents who might not believe our story. But as Rick finished his security checks and joined me on the cabin's worn couch, I realized I felt safer with him than I had in my own house. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait. Chen will either contact us or she won't. Morrison will either find us or he won't. Rick's arm came around my shoulders, pulling me against his side. But whatever happens, we face it together. The events of the day had stripped away any pretense between us. Facing death together had a way of clarifying what mattered. When Rick's lips found mine in the dim cabin light, there was nothing tentative about the kiss. "I love you," he whispered against my mouth, and the words sent electricity through my entire body. "I love you too," I whispered back, meaning it completely. Rick's hands tangled in my hair as we kissed more deeply, 20 years of loneliness and determination pouring into our connection. We made love on that old couch like it might be our last chance, bodies seeking comfort and claiming each other despite the danger outside. Afterward, we lay entwined, listening to night sounds in the woods and the distant hum of cars on the highway. Rick's fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder while we talked quietly about everything and nothing. "Do you regret it?" Rick asked as dawn approached. "Getting involved in all this?" I turned to face him, studying his features in the gray morning light. "The only thing I regret is that it took a conspiracy to bring us together." Rick's smile was soft and genuine, so different from the sharp, determined expressions I'd grown used to. When this is over, we'll figure out what comes next." I kissed him gently. "But right now, let's just focus on staying alive." At 8 a.m., Rick's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the news. SC." I turned on the cabin's old television, flipping through channels until I found a news station. The headline at the bottom of the screen made my blood run cold. "Federal raid nets Nashville law firm partners in massive fraud scheme." We watched in stunned silence as a reporter detailed the arrest of Thomas Morrison and 6 associates, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The story mentioned forged land deeds, stolen royalties, and a scheme that had defrauded dozens of families across 3 states. "We did it," I whispered. Rick pulled me close, his voice thick with emotion. "No, we did it. Have you ever taken a risk that completely changed your life? Tell me about it in the comments." Agent Chen called at noon with news that made my hands shake. "Morrison made bail 3 hours ago," she said without preamble. "Federal judge set it at $50 million. He paid it in cash." Rick's face went stone cold. "Where is he now?" "Unknown. He slipped his federal tail about an hour after release. We've got alerts out, but..." Chen's voice trailed off, and I could hear the frustration. "But he's got 20 years of practice disappearing people who threaten him," Rick finished. "I'm recommending you both enter federal protection immediately," Chen said. "We can have a team at your location within 2 hours." Rick looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. Federal protection meant safety, but it also meant the end of our investigation, the end of our ability to help the other victims. "What about the other families?" I asked. "The people who are still waiting for justice?" "The Bureau will follow up on every lead you've provided," Chen assured us. "But right now, my priority is keeping you alive." Rick made the decision for both of us. "Agent Chen, we appreciate the offer, but we're going to finish what we started. Mr. Hendricks, I strongly advise." Rick hung up and turned to me. "Last chance to back out. Federal protection, new identities, safe lives." I thought about my quiet house in Toledo, my predictable routine, my safe but empty existence. Then I looked at Rick, the man who'd shown me what it meant to fight for something bigger than myself. "I'm not backing out." Rick's smile was fierce and proud. "Then we've got work to do." We spent the next hour making calls to every victim family Rick had identified over 20 years. The Johnsons in Pike County, the Crawfords in West Virginia, the Hatfields in eastern Tennessee, people who'd given up hope of ever seeing justice. "Mrs. Johnson? This is Richard Hendricks. I know you don't know me, but I have information about what happened to your family's land." The conversations were heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. Family after family had been told their cases were hopeless, their evidence insufficient, their claims frivolous. But when Rick explained what had happened with Morrison's arrest, I heard voices breaking with emotion. You mean there's a chance? Mrs. Crawford's voice was thin with age and disbelief. After all these years? There's more than a chance, Rick told her. There's justice. By evening, we had contact information for 37 families across 3 states, all victims of the same scheme. Rick began organizing them into a coordination network, sharing information and evidence. Morrison's people will try to divide us, Rick explained as we worked. Make individual deals, buy people off, intimidate witnesses. But if we stay together, share everything we know, they can't silence all of us. I watched Rick coordinate this network of victims, and I saw him transformed. This wasn't just about his stolen land anymore, it was about redemption for everyone who'd been cheated. You're good at this, I told him as we took a break for dinner. Good at what? Leading people. Giving them hope. I moved behind his chair, massaging the tension from his shoulders. You could run for office someday. Rick's laugh was genuinely amused. A dead man running for office? That would be a first. But as my hands worked at his tight muscles, I felt him relaxing for the first time in days. We'd found our purpose together, not just seeking justice for Rick, but becoming advocates for everyone who'd been silenced by power and money. That night, as we lay in the cabin's single bed, Rick's arms around me and moonlight streaming through the windows, I realized something had fundamentally changed between us. We weren't just lovers anymore, or even partners in investigation. We were a team with a mission that extended far beyond our personal connection. What are you thinking about? Rick asked softly. The future. What we'll do when all this is over. Any ideas? I turned in his arms, studying his face in the silver light. I'm thinking we don't go back to our old lives. I'm thinking we keep doing this, helping people who've been cheated by the system. Rick's eyes searched mine. That's a dangerous way to live. Maybe. But it's also the most alive I've ever felt. I kissed him gently. Besides, someone has to stand up for the little guy. Rick's smile was soft and full of love. I can think of worse ways to spend a lifetime. As we made love again, slowly and tenderly, I knew we'd found something rare, a love built on shared purpose, strengthened by danger, and deep enough to last whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats from Morrison and his associates. But tonight, we had each other and the certainty that we were fighting for something worth the risk. When you find your true purpose in life, does it scare you or energize you? Share your thoughts in the comments. The call came at dawn, 3 days after Morrison's disappearance. Rick's phone buzzed with Agent Chen's number, and her voice was tight with urgency. We found Morrison. He's holed up in a compound in eastern Kentucky, about 50 miles from your original property. Local sheriff's department surrounded the place, but Morrison's claiming federal jurisdiction. Rick sat up in bed, instantly alert. What kind of jurisdiction? Says he's working with Homeland Security on a classified matter. Complete bullshit, but it's buying him time. Chen's frustration was obvious. We need your testimony to break his story. Can you get to the Pike County Courthouse by noon? I was already getting dressed, adrenaline replacing sleep. We'll be there. The drive to Pike County felt like traveling back in time. These were the mountains where Rick had grown up, where his family had farmed for 3 generations before everything was stolen. As we wound through narrow valleys and past abandoned mines, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us. The courthouse was a zoo of media trucks, federal agents, and local residents who'd heard their stolen land might finally be returned. Rick's hand was steady in mine as we pushed through the crowd, but I could feel the emotion building in him. Inside, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Federal Judge Patricia Williams presided from the bench while Morrison sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and confident despite being surrounded by FBI agents. Mr. Hendricks, Judge Williams called as we approached the witness stand. Please state your full name for the record. Richard James Hendricks. Rick's voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom. Though according to the defendants, I died 3 years ago. A murmur ran through the crowd. Morrison's lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, we object to this witness. Our records clearly show. Your forged records, Rick interrupted, his voice cutting through the objection like steel. The same records you used to steal 43 families' land over 20 years. Judge Williams banged her gavel. Mr. Hendricks, please limit your responses to the questions asked. But Rick was just getting started. He pulled out a thick folder, copies of every document, every recording, every piece of evidence we'd gathered. Your Honor, I have here documented proof that Thomas Morrison and his associates engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud landowners across 3 states. Forged signatures, falsified notary stamps, bribed officials, shell companies designed to hide stolen royalties. Morrison's composure finally cracked. He leaned over to whisper urgently to his lawyer, but Rick kept talking. They targeted poor families, people who couldn't afford lawyers, people who trusted the system to protect them. Rick's voice grew stronger with each word. They used a dead woman's notary seal for 8 years. They forged my signature on documents that transferred $12 million in oil rights. Objection. Morrison's lawyer was on his feet. This testimony is hearsay and speculation. Judge Williams looked down at Rick. Mr. Hendricks, do you have documentation to support these claims? Rick smiled, and the expression was sharp as a blade. Your Honor, 3 hours ago, the FBI arrested Sheriff Danny Morrison, Thomas Morrison's cousin, for accepting bribes to falsify property records. Sheriff Morrison is currently providing a full confession in exchange for federal protection. The courtroom erupted. Morrison shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. That's impossible. Danny would never. Wouldn't betray family? Rick's voice was ice cold. The way you never betrayed the community that trusted you? I watched from the gallery as 20 years of pain and determination poured out of Rick. This wasn't just testimony, this was reckoning. Mr. Morrison, Rick continued, turning to address the man who destroyed his life, you told me 3 days ago that I was legally dead. But dead men don't file federal lawsuits. Dead men don't provide recordings to FBI agents. And dead men certainly don't watch their tormentors get led away in handcuffs. Judge Williams consulted documents that Agent Chen had provided. Mr. Morrison, I'm looking at bank records showing transfers of over $40 million from companies you control to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Can you explain these transactions? Morrison's lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but Morrison pushed him away. Your Honor, I demand to speak privately with federal authorities. This case involves national security matters that can't be discussed in open court. National security? Rick's laugh had no humor in it. The only thing you're securing is your bank account. Judge Williams studied Morrison for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, I see no evidence of federal jurisdiction in this matter. However, I do see evidence of wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Bail is revoked. Defendants will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. As federal marshals approached Morrison's table, he turned to look directly at Rick. The hatred in his eyes was pure poison. This isn't over, Hendricks. You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people you're hurting. Rick stood slowly, his presence commanding the entire courtroom. You're right, Mr. Morrison. This isn't over. Because every family you cheated, every life you destroyed, every dollar you stole, they're all getting justice today. Morrison was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence. But as I watched Rick surrounded by grateful families, shaking hands and accepting tearful thanks from people who'd thought they'd never see justice, I realized the truth. The boy who'd trusted the system was gone forever. In his place stood a man who'd learned to fight it and win. And somehow, impossibly, that man was mine. Have you ever witnessed a moment when justice finally prevailed after years of injustice? How did it feel to see truth win? The celebration that night at Murphy's Tavern in downtown Pike County was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. 43 families, some traveling hundreds of miles, gathered to toast the end of 20 years of legal theft. Rick moved through the crowd like a conquering hero, but but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "You did it," I whispered when he finally made it back to our table in the corner. "You actually did it." "We did it." Rick's hand found mine across the scarred wooden table. "I couldn't have gotten this far without you." The tavern was loud with conversation, laughter, and the kind of joy that comes after long suffering finally ends. Mrs. Johnson from Pike County kept hugging anyone who'd stand still. The Crawford family had driven down from West Virginia with a cooler full of moonshine. Even some of the younger generation was there, kids who'd grown up hearing stories about stolen land, never believing they'd see it returned. Agent Chen appeared at our table around 10 p.m., looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you'd want to know, Morrison's associates are falling over themselves to make deals. We've recovered documentation of bribes paid to 17 officials across 3 states." Rick nodded but didn't seem surprised. "How much money are we talking about?" "Conservatively, $80 million in stolen royalties, not counting interest and penalties." Chen pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "The restitution payments alone will make most of these families wealthy." I nearly choked on my beer. $80 million? Could be more once we finish following the money trail. Morrison was just the tip of the iceberg. Chen looked at Rick with something approaching respect. 20 years of documentation. I've never seen a case built with that kind of patience. Rick's smile was tired but genuine. Patience is all I had left. We stayed until the tavern closed at midnight, listening to stories from families who'd given up hope years ago. The Hatfields talked about their kids who'd moved away, convinced the family was cursed by bad luck. The Crawfords showed pictures of grandchildren they'd never been able to help through college because the money wasn't there. But now everything was different. Land would be returned, royalties would be paid, lives would be rebuilt. And at the center of it all was Rick, the homeless man who'd refused to give up. Back at our motel room, we'd upgraded to a nicer place in town. Rick collapsed on the bed still fully dressed. I sat beside him, running my fingers through his gray hair. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now the lawyers take over. Restitution hearings, asset recovery, probably 2 years of court proceedings." Rick's eyes were closed, but his hand found mine. "And somewhere in there, I figure out who I am when I'm not planning revenge." The vulnerability in his voice made my heart ache. "You're the man who spent 20 years fighting for justice. The man who never gave up, even when everyone told you to. I'm also the man who fell in love with someone extraordinary in the middle of all this chaos." Rick opened his eyes, looking at me with such intensity it took my breath away. "I know I don't have much to offer. No house, no job, no normal life." I leaned down to kiss him, cutting off his doubts. "You have something better than normal. You have purpose." Rick's arms came around me, pulling me down beside him on the bed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we don't go back to our old lives. Maybe we use this experience, these connections we've built, to help other people who are fighting similar battles." Rick studied my face in the dim motel lighting. "You want to become professional advocates? Why not? You've got the investigative skills, I've got the organizational abilities. Together we could take on cases that regular lawyers won't touch." The idea seemed to energize Rick in a way I hadn't seen since the courthouse victory. There are so many people out there who've been cheated, who think the system doesn't work for them. So we show them it can work. We show them that sometimes David really does beat Goliath. Rick rolled over, pinning me beneath him on the narrow motel bed. "Are you sure about this? It would mean a life of fighting powerful people, never knowing if we're safe." I reached up to touch his face, feeling the stubble that had become so familiar. "I've never been more sure of anything." Rick's kiss was deep and grateful, full of promises for the future we were building together. As we made love in that cheap motel room, surrounded by the sounds of a small town celebrating justice, I knew we'd found something rare, a love that had been tested by danger and emerged stronger. Later, as we lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, Rick traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." I kissed his chest, tasting salt and satisfaction. Now and whatever comes next. Outside our window, Pike County slept peacefully for the first time in 20 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, justice had won, love had triumphed, and the future felt full of possibility. When you achieve something you've worked toward for years, does it feel like an ending or a beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments. 6 months after Morrison's arrest, Rick and I were living in a rented house in Lexington, Kentucky, running what we'd named the Appalachian Justice Project. Our kitchen table had become command central for an operation that was growing faster than we'd ever imagined. Mrs. Patterson from Alabama, Rick said, hanging up the phone and making notes on his legal pad. Coal Company used the same forged signature scheme to steal mineral rights from her grandmother's estate. I looked up from the laptop where I was coordinating with 3 different law firms. That's the 5th call this week from Alabama. Word is spreading. The success of our case against Morrison had created a domino effect across the Southeast. Families who'd accepted their losses years ago were digging out old documents, making phone calls, demanding answers. Local newspapers were running investigative series about land fraud. State attorneys general were opening new cases. And somehow, Rick and I had become the unofficial coordinators for all of it. Agent Chen's on line 2, I called out as Rick sorted through mail. Says she has news about the Morrison associates. Rick picked up the phone, and I watched his expression change from curiosity to grim satisfaction. All of them? Even the judge? That's excellent news, Sarah. Thank you. What's the verdict? I asked as he hung up. 6 more indictments came down this morning, including federal Judge Harold Brennan. Turns out he took bribes to dismiss cases against Morrison's companies. Rick's smile was sharp. 20-year sentences across the board. The scope of corruption we'd uncovered still amazed me. What had started as Rick's personal quest for justice had revealed a network of theft and bribery that reached into courthouses, sheriff's departments, and political offices across 3 states. Mrs. Chen also said something interesting, Rick continued. The Justice Department wants to meet with us about expanding the investigation nationwide. I felt a familiar thrill of excitement and fear. Nationwide? Apparently, the Morrison scheme wasn't unique. They found similar patterns in Texas oil country, Wyoming mineral rights, even some fishing rights cases in Alaska. Rick moved behind my chair, his hands settling on my shoulders. They want to know if we'd be willing to help coordinate a federal task force. The massage felt good, but I could sense the tension in Rick's touch. That would be a big commitment. It would also be dangerous. We'd be taking on some of the wealthiest, most connected people in the country. I leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. Over the past 6 months, we become more than partners, we become a team in every sense of the word. Rick's investigative brilliance combined with my organizational skills had proven incredibly effective. What do you think? I asked. I think 20 years ago, I lost everything because I trusted the wrong people. But 6 months ago, I found everything I needed when I trusted the right person. Rick's arms wrapped around me from behind. If you're willing to take this on, then so am I. That afternoon, we drove out to Rick's original property, now legally his again, thanks to the court settlement. The oil wells were pumping steadily, generating the royalties that should have been his all along. But what struck me most was how peaceful the land looked, like it was finally resting after years of legal turmoil. Any regrets? Rick asked as we walked the property line where his great-grandfather had first cleared trees in the 1920s. About what? About that night you opened your door to a stranger. About everything that came after. I thought about my quiet life in Toledo, my predictable routine, my safe but empty existence. Then I looked at Rick, whose eyes now held contentment along with determination. The only regret I have is that it took so long for us to find each other. Rick pulled me close, and we stood there on his reclaimed land, surrounded by the green mountains of Kentucky, planning our next battle against injustice. The Justice Department meeting is next week, Rick said. After that, our lives will never be the same. Good, I replied, meaning it completely. I was getting bored with normal anyway. That evening, we made love on Rick's land under a canopy of stars, our bodies celebrating victory and anticipating the challenges ahead. We were no longer the desperate fugitives who'd fled Toledo 6 months ago. We were advocates, partners, lovers with a mission that extended far beyond our personal happiness. As Rick held me afterward, both of us breathing hard in the cool mountain air, I realized we'd found something extraordinary. Not just love, but purpose. Not just passion, but a shared calling to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Ready for whatever comes next? Rick asked softly. With you? I kissed him deeply, tasting future possibilities on his lips. I'm ready for anything. Have you ever found a calling that was bigger than yourself? How did it change your life? Share your story in the comments. The Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C. was more intimidating than I'd expected. Rick and I sat in a conference room on the 5th floor, surrounded by federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and officials whose names I recognized from news programs. Assistant Attorney General Rebecca Martinez led the meeting, a sharp woman in her 40s who got straight to the point. Mr. Hendricks, your case in Kentucky has opened doors we've been trying to break down for years. We believe the Morrison Network is connected to similar operations in at least 12 states. Rick leaned forward, his attention completely focused. Similar how? Same methods, same shell company structures, sometimes even the same forged notary stamps. Agent Chen, who'd become something like a friend over the past months, slid folders across the table. We're looking at potential theft of over $2 billion in mineral and land rights. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 billion stolen from families across America, most of them too poor or powerless to fight back. What do you need from us? I asked. Martinez opened her laptop, showing us a map of the United States dotted with red pins. Coordination. The Morrison case proved that victims working together can break these conspiracies. We want you to help us organize similar networks in other states. Rick studied the map, his expression growing more determined with each red pin. Texas, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, these are all energy-producing states. Exactly. Wherever there's valuable resources under family-owned land, these criminals follow the same playbook. Forge documents, by officials, steal everything. Martinez clicked to another screen showing corporate organizational charts. And it all leads back to the same holding companies controlled by the same people. I felt Rick's hand find mine under the table, drawing strength from the contact. Are you saying Morrison wasn't the top of the pyramid? Morrison was middle management, Agent Chen said grimly. The real power is held by a group of energy executives and politicians who've been running this scheme for 30 years. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. We hadn't just uncovered a regional conspiracy, we'd stumbled onto a nationwide criminal enterprise that reached into the highest levels of government and business. Who are we talking about? Rick asked quietly. Martinez hesitated, then clicked to a news slide showing photographs of men in expensive suits at political fundraisers. Senator James Crawford of Texas, Energy Secretary Michael Burke, 3 sitting federal judges, and the CEOs of 4 major oil companies. I recognized most of the faces from news coverage and political advertisements. These weren't shadowy criminals, these were the people who shaped American energy policy. My God, I whispered. How is this possible? Money and power protect each other, Martinez said bluntly. But your case proved they're not untouchable. Morrison and his associates are providing evidence to save their own skins. We're building RICO cases against the entire network. Rick's grip on my hand tightened. What's the timeline? 18 months if everything goes perfectly. 3 years more likely. Martinez closed her laptop. And we'll need your help every step of the way. Organizing victims, coordinating evidence, testifying before Congress. The weight of what they were asking settled over me. 3 years of fighting the most powerful people in America. 3 years of constant danger, media scrutiny, legal battles. But then I looked at Rick, saw the fire in his eyes that had first attracted me to him, and I knew our answer. "When do we start?" Rick said. That night, in our hotel room near Capitol Hill, Rick and I made love with desperate intensity. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, more powerful enemies, battles that could destroy us both. But tonight, we had each other and the certainty that we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves. "Are you scared?" I asked afterward, my head on Rick's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Terrified," Rick admitted, his fingers running through my hair. "These people have resources Morrison couldn't dream of. They've killed to protect smaller secrets than this." "Then why are we doing it?" Rick's arms tightened around me. "Because somewhere tonight, there's a family losing their land to forged documents. Because somewhere there's a widow being cheated out of her husband's mineral rights. Because if we don't fight for them, who will?" I raised my head to look at him, seeing not just the man I loved but the crusader he'd become. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how dangerous this gets, we stay together." Rick's smile was soft and full of love. "You couldn't get rid of me if you tried." As we drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, I knew we were about to enter the fight of our lives. But we were entering it together, armed with love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that justice could prevail against any odds. The network that had stolen from countless families was about to learn what happened when they picked the wrong victims to silence. When corruption reaches the highest levels of power, do you believe ordinary people can make a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments. 2.5 years later, I stood on the steps of the Supreme Court building, holding Rick's hand as reporters shouted questions about the largest anti-corruption case in American history. The morning sun felt warm on my face, but not as warm as Rick's smile when the final verdict was announced. "The court has ruled unanimously that the defendant's convictions will stand," Chief Justice Roberts had said just minutes earlier. "The systematic theft of mineral and land rights through fraudulent means represents one of the most extensive criminal conspiracies in the nation's history." Senator Crawford, life in prison. Energy Secretary Burke, 30 years. Morrison and his associates, 25 years each. 4 federal judges removed from the bench and sentenced to federal prison. Over $3 billion in restitution ordered for the victims. Mr. Hendricks. A reporter pushed forward with her microphone. "How does it feel to see justice finally served after 30 years of theft?" Rick squeezed my hand before answering, his voice steady and strong. "It feels like America still works the way it's supposed to, when ordinary people refuse to give up fighting for what's right." "What's next for the Appalachian Justice Project?" I stepped closer to the microphone, Rick's arm around my waist. "We're opening offices in Texas, Wyoming, and Alaska. Anywhere families have been cheated out of their land or resources, we'll be there to help them fight back." The questions continued for 20 minutes, but finally Rick and I made our way to a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from the courthouse. We sat in a corner booth, sharing coffee and comfortable silence while the weight of our victory settled over us. "Can you believe it's actually over?" I asked. "This case is over," Rick corrected gently. "But the work continues. There are still families out there who need help, still criminals who think they're above the law." I studied his face, seeing the lines that hadn't been there when we first met, but also seeing contentment that had replaced the burning need for revenge. "Do you ever miss it? The quiet life?" Rick's laugh was genuinely amused. "You mean the life where I was a dead man walking the streets of Toledo?" "Not for a second. We'd been married for 18 months now, a small ceremony in the mountains of Kentucky with Agent Chen as our witness and half the families we'd helped in attendance. Our house in Lexington had become headquarters for a movement that was spreading across the country. "Mrs. Patterson called this morning," I said, pulling out my phone to check messages. "The Alabama Coal Company settlement came through. $12 million for her grandmother's mineral rights. And the Texas ranch case? Judge ruled in favor of the Henderson family yesterday. Full restitution plus punitive damages." I scrolled through more messages. "Oh, and we got a call from Oregon. Timber rights fraud involving 3 counties. Rick's eyes lit up with the familiar fire that still sent electricity through me. Road trip? Road trip, I agreed. That afternoon, we drove back to Rick's original property in Pike County. The land was beautiful now, restored and profitable, but we visited for different reasons. This was where our story had started, where a homeless man's 20-year quest for justice had become something bigger than either of us could have imagined. We made love that evening in the house Rick had built on his reclaimed land, our bodies celebrating not just physical desire but the deep satisfaction of lives lived with purpose. Afterward, we lay naked in the moonlight streaming through the bedroom windows, talking about the cases we were working on, the families we were helping, the future we were building together. "I love you," Rick whispered as we drifted towards sleep. "I love you too," I whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of my being. 3 years ago, I had opened my door to a stranger in a storm. That simple act of kindness had led to the greatest love of my life, the most important work I'd ever done, and the discovery that ordinary people really could change the world. Rick had taught me that some revenge was simply justice served cold. But he'd also taught me that the best revenge was a life lived fully, fighting for others who couldn't fight for themselves. As morning approached over the Kentucky mountains, I knew our story was far from over. There were more families to help, more criminals to expose, more battles to fight. But we would face them together, partners in love and justice, proving every day that the most powerful force in the world wasn't money or politics or corruption. It was two people who refused to give up on what was right. Rick's story proves that one person's courage to seek justice can change everything. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of ordinary people achieving extraordinary justice. Tell me in the comments, have you ever helped someone fight for what's rightfully theirs? Remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let the truth stay buried. What would you do if you discovered you had the power to restore someone's stolen life? Share your thoughts below, and never forget that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice building strength for the perfect moment to strike.